Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology, joined by Bryan Mercy, our returning guest. He is going to go over Jehovah's Witnesses, their history, their theology, what you need to know to respond to them. Bryan, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me on. Always good to be here.
How are things at Catholic Truth?
Great. We just had a full debate the other day. It was supposed to be like a 45-minute to an hour debate with a Calvinist, and turned into a heated, passionate hour and 40-minute debate. So that'll be fun.
Was it a debate you did?
Yeah.
Who did you debate?
It was a no-namer, but some guy who's been on our channel for a long time and kind of challenged us to a debate, and so we accepted. His name is Mario San Germano, and he has been all around the Protestant world, and he's now currently a Calvinist. He's been studying for over 30 years. He's sort of well-informed, but it was good. We did a different kind of debate. It wasn't a formal debate where we each have time. It was kind of like if we met up on the street and he was holding a sign and I engaged him in conversation and we just went with it. There were no rules. We just talked, and sometimes we talked passionately, and but it was good.
Well, I need to see this. This is exciting. I was not aware of that debate, so I'm
It'll be up on Sunday.
It'll be up on Sunday. That's why I haven't seen it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Y'all definitely go and check that out on Sunday. So yeah, let's go ahead and begin here. Maybe start us out with the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, who they are, things like that.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting topic because even before I get to the Jehovah's Witnesses, I have to say there was an explosion of man-made religions in the early 1800s. There was a revival movement that happened within Protestantism, and hundreds upon hundreds of new religions were all formed in the early 1800s, as were the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, Church of Christ, and countless others. And these were all known as restorationist religions, which mean they all claim that the church that Jesus started apostatized, meaning it died out and it lost its favor and authority. So it had to be restored. Now, the Mormons are the most famous church for claiming to be the restored Church of Jesus Christ. And that happened in 1829. But what they don't know is that the same year, the Jehovah's Witnesses claimed the exact same thing with Charles Taze Russell, their founder. And a few years later, it would be the Church of Christ who claims the exact same thing. They all claim that the church died out and was restored with their particular man-made denomination, except that they all contradict each other. And Jehovah's Witnesses weren't even a religion in the beginning. It went through a really long, odd, and confusing history. For example, himself, Charles Taze Russell, the founder, he grew up, he was born a Presbyterian and he grew up a Congregationalist. And his parents talked about hell a lot, and it scared him, and he didn't like that. He never liked the teaching of hell, never sat right with him, and he always had doubts in his faith with God, the Bible, and so on. And take it from there, he decided to try to verify his faith. He got into this debate with a agnostic, and it was kind of a big debate, and he, instead of converting the agnostic, it was the agnostic who converted him. Totally took away any faith that he had. He lost his faith completely. He abandoned Christianity, did not accept the Bible, did not accept any of the things that Christianity taught. And it was like that for many years, and he kind of was walking away from God completely until he ran into a man named William Miller, who was the founder of the Adventist movement. And William Miller was a charismatic man, and he really liked this guy. He wasn't shoving religion down your throat. He didn't believe in hell, so that seemed to fit him. He seemed to have a religion that fit his own beliefs, So he kind of attached himself to William Miller, and he followed him. He studied under him, and he pretty much, appropriated a lot of his teachings to his own self. And this was going great until William Miller decided to try to predict the end of the world. He said that Christ would return between 1873 and 1874. And during that time, Christ would start his reign. Of course, it never happened. And the whole movement of the Adventists broke apart into different sects. One of those sects became the Jehovah's Witnesses. Another one of those sects became the Seventh-day Adventists. And you'll notice that Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses have almost identical beliefs on so many core doctrines across the board. And in fact, on our Catholic Truth YouTube channel, we have a whole video on that, categorizing the different beliefs and how similar they are, even word for word sometimes, because they both came out of the same movement. Both kind of have weird understandings of hell. They believe in soul sleep and things that the Adventists accepted, but Christians do not believe. So I'll take a breath. I don't know if you had any questions at this time or if you wanted me to continue.
Okay, I'm just curious. Now, I believe I know the answer, but I want to double check because this is certainly your area, not mine. William Miller, when he gave this false prediction, how did he attempt to cover this over?
the same way that Charles Taze Russell covered it over when he tried to predict the world the following year. They both predicted that Jesus would come. Didn't happen. And so they both said that Jesus did come invisibly. They said that, Jesus did return. He did, but it was just invisibly and we couldn't see him. Yeah. And then the following year, Charles Taze Russell tried to predict the end of the world in 1874, and it didn't come to pass. And in 1914, which we'll get to in a few minutes, but just as a preview, he also said at that time he did start his heavenly reign. It was just invisibly. He came invisibly and he started his reign. Coincidentally, it's the exact same thing that Ellen G. White said when she failed to predict the end of the world. She's the founder of the Seventh-day Adventists, and she said he came back, but invisibly. So, it's just this pattern that we see stemming from William Miller.
Yeah. Wow. It's a pretty fascinating attempt to try to cover over a failed prediction instead of just saying, hey guys, I'm sorry I was wrong. I need to correct my beliefs here. It's wow. It's pretty amazing how gullible people can be, that anybody actually continued to follow them after.
Yeah, no doubt. And it gets worse.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how it gets worse. Let's hear more.
Sure. So why don't we start out with the fact that around this time, there were a lot of accusations against Charles Taze Russell, that he eventually went on to become a pastor. And by pastor, I mean he made himself a pastor. And he started a local Bible study, just trying to predict the end of the world using pyramidology, occult things, and really bizarre ways of trying to figure out the end of the world. And he ended up dubbing himself a pastor, kind of shepherding some people in churches, but he was still against creeds, organized religion. He wanted nothing to do with organized religion. It was more of just a Bible study, getting together with people, that sort of thing. And he, of course, he didn't even finish high school, didn't have a college diploma, had no degrees in Greek or Hebrew or anything related to the Bible. Suddenly, he's a pastor. A lot of his critics have rightly questioned and condemned him on that notion. But he would run into a lot more problems later on because his wife, when he got married, ended up divorcing him. She dragged him into court and had several women in there with charges that he had cheated on her with other members of his church, of the parish. And so that got him into a lot of trouble, and he somehow survived the embarrassment of missing the end of the world and a divorce. And he continued on and continued to try to predict the end of the world in 1874, again in 1879, 1913, 1914, 1915, 1918, 1925, and 1975, and other times as well. You think if you'd missed the mark a few times, you'd just stop it. But he continued on. And
I'm curious, if he's saying that Jesus did return invisibly, how come he's making additional predictions after that?
Well, the invisible reign was that Jesus, it was the beginning of the end of all things. That was his phraseology. Mm-hmm. So Jesus was going to start the beginning of his reign on earth. And he believed that that was going to come to a conclusion of all the systems of the earth, all the wickedness, all the wars, everything was going to cease in 1914. He believed, and he actually says, I have a book here and I go into it in depth on my videos on Jehovah's Witnesses on our channel, but there's a book here that goes through all the Watchtower quotes for themselves, literally. And in one of the quotes, I actually enjoyed it thoroughly. It says that Protestants and Catholics are going to join one force under popedom. And the Pope is going to be the head of Protestant and Catholics who are going to unite under one religious banner. They're going to acknowledge one religious creed, and they're going to fight against Jehovah's Witnesses and Jesus, who will wipe them all out, which ironically is the exact same thing that Seventh-day Adventists have said, that they're going to come together. But it's not going to be the Jehovah's Witnesses who are persecuted. It's the Seventh-day Adventists who will be persecuted, and Jesus will wipe everyone else out except for them. So that is what they mean, is that he did come invisibly, but it was the beginning of the end. And the end was going to culminate in 1914 when Jesus came down. In fact, World War I was all the rage at that time. And they said that this was the end. This was the last war. This was going to end it all. And Jesus was going to come down and end it. But people were waiting for 1914. And after 1914, they were still waiting because it didn't come to pass.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. But for some reason, people continued to follow this individual.
And they would until 1975. I'll get to that in a second. But in 1975, hundreds of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses left the organization at once. It was a mass exodus when they finally failed that prediction, because many witnesses had sold their homes. They had sold their property. They were expecting the imminent return of Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, Moses, and all the prophets of old, which had been foretold by the Jehovah's Witnesses for decades. In fact, Joseph Rutherford, who we'll get to in a minute, was the second president. He is the one who made the religion of the Jehovah's Witnesses as we know it today. And he predicted the world to end in 1925. And he was so sure of it. And everyone was laughing at him. And he said, you'll see. And he failed. But in 1929, he built a house known as Beth Sarim, which is House of Princes in Hebrew. And he built an actual house, and the deed is very confusing, but as I understand it, he deeded it to biblical characters because he expected their imminent return and they were going to possess the house. And so in 1929, you have this house that's deeded to biblical characters, except on the deed, it says he can live in it. And it's a beautiful house in California, which is still there. And he lived in it with all the newest amenities. How convenient, and free of charge. And so you have these people who are waiting in 1925. It fails. 1975 comes, and that was the last straw. People walked away forever. And in fact, right after 1975, people had had enough. Even the highest up people in the organization. And one guy, I believe it's from Sweden. This book's called The Gentile Times Reconsidered. It's the chronology on Christ's return. I mean, it's a beast. And he absolutely annihilates, demolishes, and reduces to rubble all of the Jehovah's Witness claims about chronology in the Bible, starting with Daniel and going through their messed up chronology and how they tried to figure out the end of the world. And he shows them how their dates are wrong, their historical facts are wrong, everything. I mean, it was so demolishing that people at the highest levels of the organization were leaving. And in fact, it caused Raymond Franz, who was, I believe, the second to the head in command, maybe it was the third head in command, and caused him to leave. And he wrote a whole book called Crisis of Conscience. And this is also a beast. And it goes through all the errors of Jehovah's Witnesses. And for the first time in a long time, people stopped just listening to these men who ran the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, who pretty much run the lives of millions of people. And they started questioning, and they started looking up facts for themselves. They looked into this Gentile Times Reconsidered compared to what the Jehovah's Witnesses said, and they said, it's nonsense. They failed to predict the world again and again and again. The Bible says in Deuteronomy 18:32 that if you predict something to happen in the name of the Lord and it doesn't come to pass, then you are a false prophet and you should not be listened to. And by that condemnation, the Bible says we should not listen to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And from that time on, hundreds of thousands of people left.
But I'm a little confused.
I can't hear you.
Um, can you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3.
I think you're on mute.
No, I'm not on
Oh,
mute.
I still can't hear you.
Testing.
Do
I show
I?
my audio levels are coming through. Y'all let me know in the chat if y'all can hear me.
That's weird.
Okay, everybody else can hear me. Yeah.
Can you try?
Okay,
Okay, I can hear you now.
testing 1, 2, 3. You can hear me now? Okay. All right. So I'm a little confused still though. Why did they walk away in 1975 but not all these other times where there were failed predictions? Why 75?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think the longer and longer we grow as a human species, like we become more critical. We maybe they've just had enough of it. And I know at that time people were selling their houses, sold all their property. They weren't doing that in earlier times. I don't know why. Maybe the predictions seemed more clear. Maybe it seemed more accurate.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure since I was living, but I was a kid.
Yeah. It's just interesting, like that 75 would be a deal breaker, but not all these other numerous times.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, is that everything on the history, and should we shift into theology yet, or do you have more?
Well, I just want to point out one more fun little fact, two more fun little facts. One, Charles Taze Russell was sort of a con man, as was Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormons, who was put in prison twice. But Charles Taze Russell was also convicted for selling miracle wheat. And he was charging people absorbent amounts of money and claiming that this grew faster and stronger and healthier than other stalks of wheat. So he kind of got convicted for that as well. As
It happened.
Yeah,
Things happen.
Then after that, Charles Taze Russell, after he died, well, Charles Rutherford kind of came into power, we'll say. There was a big fight, and Millerites did not accept the Rutherfords, so they went out west and just continued to be called Millerites, but they were following Charles Taze Russell. And so then other ones were following Joseph Smith and Charles Rutherford. Judge Rutherford. And Judge Rutherford was the one who started the Jehovah's Witnesses. He is the one who built it up into the organization that we know today. He's the one who started door-to-door evangelization. He named it the Jehovah's Witnesses. He started preaching, even using cars with record players on top. And pretty much it would shock everybody who knows the Jehovah's Witnesses today. Like the founder, the president, the prophet, like he changed all of Joseph Smith's teachings. Why do I keep saying Joseph Smith? I'm sorry. He changed Judge Rutherford. He changed his teachings. And Charles Taze Russell wrote a 7-volume series called Studies in Scriptures. And he said, nobody can even begin to understand the scriptures if you don't read my 7-volume work.
Sure.
This 7-volume work was very important. And he said, you'll remain in darkness forever. Yet Judge Rutherford didn't bother reading it and changed it all. And Nathan Noor, the following president, changed all his teachings. And so at the very beginning of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have a lot of changes. And you have this prophet who's claimed to be a prophet to restore the true teachings of Jesus. And yet it was quickly changed. And so if he was really a prophet and called by God, why would they change his teachings? That would be my question. There's so much shady history and dealings within the Jehovah's Witnesses and the history itself.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, sounds like there's a lot of flip-flopping here, theologically.
Yes.
Maybe walk us through some of the basics here of Jehovah's Witness theology.
Yeah, sure. Jehovah's Witnesses are known for rejecting, the biggest thing is the Trinity. And I know a lot of people make fun of them because they believe only 144,000 people go to heaven and they don't accept blood transfusions. And many Christians are so quick to say, what a dumb religion. How could anyone believe that? Who could believe that 144,000 people go to heaven? And I love to play devil's advocate and say things like, well, the Bible says in Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 that only 144,000 people go to heaven. That's it. And they say, wait, really? The Bible says that? The Bible actually says that? Well, how do you refute it? And I'm like, well, why are you making fun of another religion if you haven't done due diligent research yourself? Don't make fun of others unless you actually understand what you're talking about. So they are trying to go by the Bible. They just misunderstand it. Now, they reject the Trinity. They don't believe Jesus is God, and they don't believe the Trinity. They believe that's a pagan belief started probably by Constantine, and they have a whole watchtower actually on this, and it's called "Why Do You Believe in the Trinity?" And should you believe in the Trinity? It goes really through history, tradition, quotes the early church fathers, and it's a mess. It is a disaster of knowledge. And I went through this whole thing myself, and especially on the church fathers. They go through and they quote them to show that they didn't believe in the Trinity or the divinity of Christ. So what I did is I went through the quotes that they put in the watchtower, and then I went to the actual quotes of the church fathers, and I showed that they weren't even remotely close. They put all these ellipses in there, the dots, and all the stuff they left out were all about Jesus being God. And they so selectively quoted them that it was kind of an embarrassment. Not to mention that it's actually so bad and there's so many errors in it that they've actually ceased production on that, and they've taken it out. They don't even use it anymore. But besides that, they believe that, yes, they believe in God, but not a Trinity. They don't believe in blood transfusions because they believe blood is the life essence of a person in a sense. They don't believe in body and soul. They believe soul is just kind of, and not an eternal soul. They believe we're souls. We're all souls, but there's no eternal soul, which is why there's no eternal hell. Nobody goes to hell. They don't believe in hell. They believe that when you die, you just cease to exist. And that's a popular teaching for the Adventists and all of those who came out of that movement. But why do they reject blood transfusions? They literally try to steal people out of hospitals, their own people who are going to receive blood transfusions. And many of them have died because of it, because they believe that drinking blood is against God. And they believe that once you do this, you're giving your life to them, even though it really doesn't make sense because you're not dying. You're just helping them to live. And they say, yeah, but only God can give life, except that we give life all the time. When a man and a woman come together, we make life. If you pull someone out of the water who's drowning, you give them CPR. You breathe into their mouth. You hold their nostrils. You bring back their life. We do it all the time. We help.
Are they against CPR?
Not that I know of. But they are against a lot of things. I mean, they're against Mother's Day. They're against Father's Day. They're against St. Patrick's Day, Valentine's Day, Christmas, Easter, birthdays.
I saw old images of the Watchtower celebrating Christmas. What's that about?
Yes, and because they believe that they used to celebrate Christmas, and they used to argue saying, well, we don't know when Jesus was born, but it doesn't matter. What is important is that we just celebrate his day and that he came to save us. But at some point in history, they changed that. And it was probably around Joseph Rutherford's time. And they started saying, no, this came from paganism. This is a pagan teaching that Christians kind of put their Christian stamp on it. And yep, there it is. And
Independence, Rutherford, Nor, France, and Henschel.
Yes, exactly.
The last
I was going to mention Nor as well.
At Brooklyn, Bethel, 1926.
Yep, I was going to mention Nor was in there as well. Yeah, and then at some point they changed that, saying it was pagan. And they did the same thing to Jesus dying on a cross. You can actually find Watchtower images of Jesus dying on a cross. But now they say that's just pagan. That's not true. He died on a torture stake. And so one of their three shticks is that God's name is Jehovah, and you have to call him by his name. 2, they're the only restored Church of Christ. And 3, Jesus died on a torture stake and not a cross. And Jesus is not God. He's actually Michael the Archangel. Those 4 things are really the things that they try to hold to and really persuade you on.
Those are really big sticking points for them. Whether or not it was a cross or a stake. That's a hill to die on, I guess.
Yeah,
or a cross to die on, or a stake to die on. I don't know.
But they did teach it, and then they changed it.
Oh, so they changed their perspective on this. They said that he did die on a cross at first.
Yeah, and they have pictures of it in their early Watchtower magazines. Well, actually, it was the Zion magazine at the time.
So we just continue to change our theology, as the years progress. Yeah. Um, so there's no actual authority among the Jehovah's Witnesses. They can just continually change their perspective.
Just like Mormons,
Mhm.
it can always have a later revelation, or in fact, both of the religions are changing a lot right now because of the internet, and because the internet is people are researching secretly and discovering what nonsense a lot of their beliefs and teachings are. They're starting to try to explain them away like never before. Well, it's not like that. It's actually like this. Or, like Mormons have always been like, hey, here's what we believe, but they'll never tell you what they actually believe. But Jehovah's Witnesses have always been in their face about their odd beliefs and saying that if you don't accept them, you're not part of the true church. And now they're saying, well, it's not quite that simple. So they're kind of both appealing to newer revelation, brighter light, I guess, development of doctrine in an unhealthy way.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, they've always changed them, and they've always had a lot of changes.
Tell me about their translation of the Bible.
They have their own Bible, and it's called the New World Translation of the Bible. And it's pretty much just it's plagiarism of what the Bible is, with changes, countless changes that didn't suit their theology. So, for example, all of the passages referring to Jesus as God, or people worshiping Jesus in scripture, or anything like that, they change the wording so it doesn't actually say that. Like in John 1:1, it says that in the beginning was the Word, Jesus.
Mhm.
The Word Jesus was with God, and the Word Jesus was God. Now they change it to say that the Word Jesus was a God, implying that apparently there's more than one God. And likewise, in Luke chapter 9, when it talks about people bowing down and worshiping Jesus, they changed it to they did obeisance to him, meaning like they just honored him. Or John 20:28 is one of my favorites, where Thomas comes out and says, my Lord and my God. That's what he tells Jesus, my God. And they're just, oh, he wasn't actually saying that. He was just saying, my Lord and oh my God, I praise you, up in heaven. No, he's not referring to Jesus.
Mhm.
Except that the Greek there, ho theos, literally means like the whole phrase means the Lord of me and the God of me. Like it's personal. It's not talking about like God up in heaven. It's
Mhm.
referring to Jesus. So they change countless passages. And it's not a surprise, because they were under a lot of heat because they wouldn't release the names of the people who translated the Watchtower Bible. And it took a long time, but eventually when the names came out, what people discovered is that the four people who translated the Bible had no knowledge of Greek. They never studied Greek. Not one of them. Well, one of them studied Greek, but it was for 2 years, but it wasn't biblical Greek. So it's irrelevant. And none of them studied Hebrew. So they literally had no knowledge of the biblical languages, which means they could not properly interpret the Bible. And they just changed the passages that they liked.
Yeah. Um, it seems I don't recall the details. But it was like the first edition of the New World Translation, their translation, seemed to have some slip ups in there where they did indicate that Jesus was God, whereas in subsequent editions they altered that. Am I misremembering here?
That might be true, but I'm actually not sure about that. I would have to look into the
Yeah.
specific differences of the translations. It's not, but I would say that I'm not surprised, because it's happened in their watchtowers too. I mean, literally down through histories, they've made books chronicling the changes in the watchtowers, literally contradicting themselves over and over again.
Why do you think people find this attractive? Why are they growing given so many problems?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that they attract people who don't know their faith. If they go to a house and someone's a strong Christian and they hear these things, they're going to be like, what? No, they're either going to slam the door in their face or just be like, no, you should become a Christian and try to convert them. But then they come across someone else who doesn't know anything, and they come up and say, hey, look what the Bible says. It
Mhm.
says that Jesus is Michael the Archangel, even though it doesn't.
Mhm.
And it says this and it says that. And these people don't know any better. And so they run off and they get scared. And they said, you better join up with us before the imminent end of the world. And it's coming. The conclusion of all systems is coming. They're still preaching that doctrine.
Mhm.
And so people run off because they don't know better. And a lot of people are searching today. And So
Mhm.
people don't go to door, they don't love them, they don't welcome them. And then when someone does, they say, well, I am searching, I do want something. And so they join up with these people. And then once they're in a cult, which is exactly what Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are, and arguably Seventh-day Adventists, well, then you're not allowed to question anymore. You have to drink the Kool-Aid, you have to, toe the party line. And once you start questioning, that is getting you close to disfellowship, or what we would call excommunication. So you can't question. And even if you have questions or doubts, you can't express them. So it keeps people there, even if they shouldn't be.
Hmm. What are some good talking points that you would recommend to people who are, new to Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're concerned that they're going to encounter some in the near future? What are some things that they should know before interacting with Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, the first thing I would say is, if you don't know your faith like really well, and you don't know the Bible really well, Jehovah's Witnesses do. And they can dance circles around most Catholics, even good Catholics. They can dance circles around them. Doesn't mean what they teach is correct, but you should know that they're so good at their pre-programmed talking points and bringing you from one passage to the next to this next that it actually does sound true. If you don't really know your faith, you can get lost. So I'd recommend not talking about the Trinity, because that is their bread and butter. They're very good at it. And unless you know how to explain the Trinity really well, I would avoid that subject.
Mhm.
I would actually focus on other subjects, like how the Watchtower itself, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, the men who rule millions of lives, are untrustworthy, how their message has changed thousands of times. They can't be trusted. They've predicted the end of the world many times, and the Bible says that if you predict something in the name of God and it doesn't come to pass, then you are a false prophet. Period. So that's where I start. And I have quotes from their own sources saying, look, this is what your Watchtower said. Look, this is where it says that world will end in 1914 and in 1975. In fact, the prophecy about Jehovah's Witness, about Protestants and Catholics getting together under the Pope and creating one world religion. I mean, I'm still Catholic, and I know Protestants, and we're not together. They don't accept us. Never happened. And so that alone has just disproven so much of what they have to say. So I like to focus on discrediting the organization themselves and asking
Uh-huh.
people questions like, how can I trust them? If they've been wrong so often, how can I, from the outside looking in, how can I trust that? And I would also focus on the fact that Charles Taze Russell was an 18-year-old boy who started a Bible study, and his founder changed his teachings, and the next person changed his teachings. So which teachings are right? Like, how can we even trust the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses if they can't even get it right among themselves? Those are two things that I like to focus on to start with. I mean, we can talk about others as well, like Jesus being Michael the Archangel and some of their bizarre interpretations.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they deny a bodily resurrection of Jesus. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes, they do. They believe that Jesus was kind of like a ghost, and even though the Bible says that he rose, he really didn't rise. And when I asked them about this, I said he met with the apostles after his resurrection. And he says, does a ghost have hands and feet and a body of flesh and blood like I do? See and believe. And so I said, Jesus claimed to have flesh and blood. So how can you say he doesn't? How can you say it wasn't a physical resurrection? And they say, well, Jesus just told them that because they had a lack of faith and they needed to see in order to believe. And so I say, okay, let me get this straight. Jesus lied to them. Jesus lied to them to tell them the truth. And lying is a sin, and therefore you're saying Jesus sinned. And they often don't know what to say about that. Similar to the 144,000, some people say the 144,000 people who go to heaven are already there. Some say they're not there yet, and others say, well, they were there, but they fell like Satan did. I'm like, why can't any of you agree? And it goes back to the fact that they can't even understand. They have no unity of teaching. It goes back to what you said. They have no unity of authority, and anything can change at any time.
How do you know if you're one of the 144?
That depends on who you ask. Obviously, Charles Taze Russell was, obviously, but
Mhm.
you don't know. Some people, and I've talked to them and I've asked them, some people say, well, you just feel it. Others will say there's like an anointing on you. You know, the Holy Spirit reveals it to you.
Sure.
Others saying you can't know until you end. So really, it's speculative. Nobody really knows.
But for those who aren't part of the 144K, what happens to them?
Well, if you don't go to heaven, then they believe that you come back down to a perfect paradise on earth. And their literature is littered with pictures of people petting lions, cuddling with tigers and llamas, and all sorts of, happy days where we're going to have a perfect paradise when Adam and Eve were on earth. They were put in a garden. It was a perfect paradise. And that's what we're going to have for the rest of, I guess, eternity. Even though I like to ask them, well, what if somebody, do we still have free will? Because what if somebody decides they don't want to follow God anymore? Could we just start this cycle over and over again of sin? And they always surprisingly say yes. We could. I don't think they would, but we could. But that's what they believe. If you don't follow Jehovah and you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you're going to rot in the grave. There's no hell. You just die and rot in the grave. But if you do follow Jehovah, then you'll come back to a perfect paradise on earth with your family and friends forever.
Well, in fairness, I guess cuddling with tigers and llamas would be pretty cool, right?
It would be for the first 1 billion years. And then, all of it, that's what I tell them. I was like, all of this stuff is just going to get old. You take your favorite food and you eat it every day. It's not your favorite food anymore. It's just, you lose the taste for it. That's how we're made as humans. You can have all the fun things you want on this earth, and it's going to grow old. I was like, you guys feel free to stay here on earth. Go ahead. I'm going to heaven with God. Revelation chapter 7 says, I saw a multitude that nobody could number standing before the throne of God and the Lamb. And I always ask them, where is the throne of God? They say in heaven. I said, where are the multitudes that were not the 144,000 standing before the throne of God? Where's that throne of God again? In heaven. So I try to get them to see, we're destined for heaven. We're destined for a beatific vision with our God, to have a relationship with him and to be filled with him for all eternity and have that beautiful relationship. This is what we have now. It's not going to be the same as heaven.
What's their deal with Jehovah in the divine name of God?
Yeah, they're kind of obsessed with the name Jehovah, and their whole religion is founded off of it, because they believe that the earliest Christians removed the word Jehovah. Actually, they blame the Jews for removing the word Jehovah from the Bible. And they'll say that, you see, it's replaced with the word Lord, which is all capitalized, capital Lord. And every time you see that, it's meant to say Jehovah. So they're actually replacing the name of God. And that's bad, because God says you need to call him by his name. I said, really? Where? And they could never give me a passage. I said, God never said you have to call him by his name. That's a talking point by yours. And I say, Moses asked him what his name was, and God didn't even give him a name. He gave him a sleight of hand, because I said, in the Old Testament, people believed they could control their gods by learning their name. And if they could know their name, they could kind of have some sway with them, which is why they work so hard to do it. And that's why God didn't give him a name. He said, I am who I am. That was kind of like his way of saying, you're never going to know. I'm eternal, And so, but they've run with that. And they've said, no, it's Jehovah, and you have to call God by his name. What they don't tell you, and what they haven't learned up until recently, is that the word Jehovah is a mistranslation of the word Yahweh, which is the original name of God, which the Jews all used, and which Christians all used. In all of the earliest Christian literature, everywhere uses the name Yahweh. No one used the word Jehovah, except for in the 13th century, a Spanish monk mistranslated the word Yahweh and came out with Jehovah. So the word Jehovah was never heard of before the 1200s. And Jehovah's Witnesses are finally acknowledging this fact, and you'll see this in their literature. It's reflected now in their literature. They're saying, well, whether it's Jehovah or Yahweh, you still have to call him by his name, and they're both God's name. But Jehovah's the English translation of it. I said, actually, there's a besides the point, but it's not an English translation, but that's their way of saying it is now. And saying that, oh, well, all of the earliest biblical texts use Jehovah. I said, really? How is that possible, since it was never heard of before the 1300s?
Wow. So they're even starting to concede some of these points.
Yes, they are. Yeah, and they're changing them as we speak.
Yeah, so it kind of leaves the question, what are they going to concede next? I mean, with this constant evolving theology, it just seems it's incredibly unreliable, but it kind of makes sense when you don't have a teaching authority that's really authoritative and divinely established. You'll likely just evolve your theology. Um, wow. Any other points that we should be aware of before we take some chat questions?
Well, just real briefly, just to recap that, they think Mother's Day is pagan and St. Patrick's Day, all Christmas, Easter. I mean, birthdays. There's only 2 birthdays mentioned in the Bible, and both of them refer to people who weren't good. They were not nice people. Therefore, all birthdays are bad. That's their takeaway. And they don't salute the American flag. They don't salute any flag. They don't believe in patriotism because they believe it's false worship. Every time you salute the flag, you're worshiping the flag. Every time you celebrate Mother's Day, you're worshiping. I wouldn't know if they go so far as to say you're worshiping her, but they would say that you're giving honor and glory to your mom when all of it should be given to God, which, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, doesn't make sense in anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we couldn't be respectful to anybody at that point. Okay, well, here is a question for you. What is the Jehovah's Witnesses view of salvation, and how does it differ from Catholics?
Well, theirs is a salvation in a sense. I mean, Catholics are convicted of this and accused of this, but really they do believe in salvation by works. Like, you have to follow God, you have to follow his son Jesus, but you also have to do a lot. You have to be part of the organization, and you should put in a lot of hours evangelizing door to door. You have to actually evangelize, live out, that truth and that sort of thing. So you have to do a lot, but you have to be a Jehovah's Witness, whereas the Catholic Church teaches that non-Catholics can be saved, if by no fault of their own. They're like, no, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you're not going to heaven. So really it comes down to following the rules of Jehovah, the rules that he laid out. I don't see a large reliance on Jesus. Yeah, they give lip service to Jesus died for us and stuff, but when you get down to it, it's all about what you do, the rules you follow, how you're faithful to the organization and faithful to Jehovah himself. So there's similarities, but there's some differences as well.
So do they object to the days of the week of the calendar and the names of the months? And some of them are named after pagan gods.
I know. This is the same thing that Seventh-day Adventists do. They say, oh, well, Rome made Sunday the day of the Sabbath, and that's just the sun god. They worship the sun god on that day. And I'm actually making a video on this as we speak. But I told them, I'm going through the days of the week. I said, every single day is referring to a different God. And I tell the Jehovah's Witnesses, you meet on Thursdays for your book studies. That's the day of Thor. You're meeting and discussing Jesus on the day of Thor. What do you have to say about that? Oh, well, that's different. That's not the sun god. No, it's the God of thunder and lightning. So how is it any different? And the honest average Jehovah's Witness has no idea. They haven't thought about it. They only give pre-programmed responses. They've been told that, Sunday's the, day of this. And they've been told that, but they don't research it. And when they do research it, they start to come to conclusions on their own. For example, I've gone to Jehovah's Witness book studies and Watchtower studies, and they ask questions. And one man gave a beautiful answer, and they said, Brother Larry, what does the Watchtower say? Tap, tap, tap. Because what did he do wrong? He gave his own thoughts. Then he went back and gave it word for word from the Watchtower and said, yes, that's the correct answer. So it's actually a lot of brainwashing and cult tactics. So when they hear these things, they just accept them, but they don't think outside the box to the rest of this many times unless we bring it up to them.
Who's in charge of the Watchtower making these decisions?
The governing body. The Watchtower is in New York, and it's a governing body made up of some old men, just men, and they're the ones who make all the decisions. They're the ones who make the doctrines. They're the ones who employ everybody else to write what they say. And in fact, my friend is a former member of the Watchtower. He worked in the research department, I believe, for 12 years. And he was instructed to take what they say and basically find proof for it and put it into print. So they had to go reach the stuff and research it. And when researching it, he said half the stuff I couldn't even find that they're saying. And the other half was just wrong. And many people before them didn't question the organization. They just put it into print and continually did so. But his questioning of them got him into big trouble. And then he ended up leaving the Watchtower the more and more he studied. And now he's a Catholic today who has led thousands, literally thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses out of the organization of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
What is their liturgy like, if you could call it such?
No, it's not a liturgy. It's more of a meeting within four white walls. It's actually in a business room. You know, they rent out a hall and they have chairs, and it's mostly just a talk. Yeah, they have the Lord's Supper, I believe, once a year, and only the 144,000 people, if you're still alive and if you're on earth, only you can take it. So basically, nobody takes it. You know, maybe one person here or one person there will take it, but nobody really takes it, and it's only given out once a year. It's mostly just a meeting and a teaching. So I don't even know how it could be considered worship.
Any hymns, any singing?
I can't remember. I visited, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and that, but I can't. Maybe but I can't remember them singing any hymns. Maybe they start with one, but I don't remember. It doesn't ring a bell.
Wow, that's pretty odd. Well, looks like we just answered that question, Grandma Lynn. But thank you for the question. Okay, let's see here. How do Jehovah's Witnesses interpret the role of Jesus Christ in comparison to the Catholic understanding? Yeah, so maybe talk about their understanding of Jesus versus ours a little bit more.
Sure. So they believe that Jesus is a created creature. He's not eternal as we believe in him. He's created by Jehovah, and he's the first created being. And they believe, as I said earlier, that he's Michael the Archangel. And when I asked them why, they said, well, because the book of Revelation says he's going to descend with the voice of an archangel. And I said, okay, where does it say he's Michael the Archangel? And they said, right there. He's going to descend with the voice of an archangel. I said, well, there's lots of archangels. How do you know he's Michael? Why are you making that inference? Second, it also says he has white woolly hair and fire in his eyes. Is he now a fireplace? We're making false conclusions, logical conclusions. And so they believe that he's only an angel. He's only there to do the bidding of Jehovah. Yes, he died on the cross to save us from our sins. They do believe that. But from all the literature I've read, I hardly ever read anything on Jesus, his death, yes, they do have it, but I don't see a lot of it. I mean, he did die on a torture stake for us, and he did redeem us so we can go to heaven. But a lot of it has to do with just serving Jehovah. I don't hear a lot about Jesus.
What in the world is going on with this one? All I know is when the Jehovah's Witnesses visited me, they asked me if Adam and Eve had a belly button. Say what?
Well, I know that there's a book called Did Adam and Eve Have Belly Buttons? But I don't know why they would say that. I don't know why. I don't know why.
Is pretty odd. Do they believe in any form of apostolic succession?
Nope, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's had to be restored.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was restored later. I mean, the early church died out. It wasn't even the Church of God anymore for like over 1,000 years.
So would you say that they're not Christians since they're not Trinitarians?
Correct, because they reject the Trinity. They reject Jesus, which is the central doctrine of Christianity, which was hashed out in the councils. They can't be considered Christians. Neither can Mormons. In some cases, Seventh-day Adventists and Church of God and other religions like that, Islam.
So what did they say in reference to John 1:1? The word was God.
Well, they said that the word was a God. They changed that teaching to show that he was a God. And then they'll immediately try to bring you to passages like when Jesus was hanging on the cross. What did he say? He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And they say, see, even Jesus calls God, God. And he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. He says that nobody knows the day or the hour except for God alone. So he's saying that there are things he doesn't know because he's not God. Only God knows everything. So, and these were the first objections that Jehovah's Witnesses gave to me when I was a new baby apologist, and I did not know how to answer them at all.
Mhm.
And they were basically saying this proves that Jesus isn't God. If he was, who was he praying to in the Garden of Gethsemane? Was he praying to himself, they would ask me? I said, no, he was praying to God in heaven. Oh, but you said he was God, so he's praying to himself. And they got me all confused, and I didn't know what to say. But that's what they try to do. They love to take you, oh, look at this verse, which connects to this verse, and it connects to this verse, connects to this verse. Our whole thing seems plausible now because we bring it back to us, and we're really good at connecting all the dots to our talking points.
Is this maybe kind of what got you into studying Jehovah's Witnesses because of that experience?
This experience got me into where I am today. Yeah, I went home and researched all the answers that they gave me, and I found some good answers, and I brought it back to them the next week. And they pounded me over the head with some new ones, like Constantine started the Catholic Church and other things. Didn't know anything about it, so looked it up, brought it back the next week. 6 months later, I was asking them questions that they couldn't answer. 8 months later, they were running away from me and not wanting to talk about it anymore. And, I was very knowledgeable about my faith, and it was about that time that I ran into evangelicals, fundamentalists, who were telling me Pope is not in the Bible, purgatory, confession of sins to a priest, and all these other things. So start all over again, look all of these up. And 2 years later, I was pretty knowledgeable about all the religions because I was studying them all just in case Catholicism was not correct. I just assumed Catholicism was correct because my parents told me, but I wanted to know. So I studied all the other religions just in case as well. And now, well over 20 years later, I'm teaching other people to defend their faith so they don't have to be as awkward as I was.
Yeah, if you look here on the screen, here's their interlinear.
Yeah, I have that here too.
So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was toward the God, and God was the Word. But in the translation, they say in the beginning, the Word was, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they add the indefinite article there.
And even in, like, say, John, let's say Matthew 26:26, their interlinear says, this is my body. And it actually says that in the interlinear under the Greek. But in the English notes on the right-hand side, their translation, it says, this means my body. They literally changed the Greek to whatever they wanted to mean it to.
Now, let's look at a different edition that they have here. I think this is what I was addressing earlier that changed from their interlinear. Here's another one. So I just showed you, I think, the earlier version. And this is the more recent version.
Okay.
In the interlinear, in a beginning was the Word, and the Word was with the God, and a God was the Word. They put a under it, whereas before they didn't put a God underneath the interlinear. And over here in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos with God, and the Logos was God.
That's weird. Still saying he's God.
Yeah.
Here in this interlinear translation, you probably can't see it if I held it up, but my interlinear translation says God was the Word for word under the Greek. God was the Word. So the Word was God.
Yeah. So it looks like they are changing this in various editions.
Yes.
Which sounds kind of familiar with the changing of their theology throughout the years, right?
Yes.
It just comes across as we're going to make the facts, fit the narrative, rather than just kind of go with, okay, well, here's the facts, and now we're going to derive theology from that.
Exactly. And they have, if you look at throughout like their Greek interlinear, they have other words like Greek words for God, which actually says God, which is the same word in John 1:1. But in the other verses that just refer to God, they don't change it to mean a God, only in John 1:1.
Yeah. Now the claim that Jesus is a God How do they understand that? Would they say that others are also gods in that
It
improper
depends who you
sense?
talk to be honest, because
Mhm.
they all have different understandings of it. But basically, they'll say, "Well, didn't Jesus say that we're all gods? You will be gods." So it's kind of goes back to that whole Mormon thing.
Mhm.
We're all going to be gods, but that doesn't really make sense either. It's not really convincing intellectually.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. We're coming up on the hour. Go ahead and any concluding thoughts that you want to offer. Also, put in a plug for your channel, Catholic Truth, while you're at it at the end.
Sure. If you would like to know more about Jehovah's Witnesses, check out our Catholic Truth YouTube channel. We have a ton of videos on them, including a really fun one of actual conversations I've had with Jehovah's Witnesses where I talk to them and I go to their watchtower and I've gone to their churches and I've knocked on their doors and
Yeah.
they don't like it. At first they think I'm, just, oh, you want to have questions? Oh, yes, I have lots of questions. And by the time I leave, I had one lady yelling at me. She's like, "You Catholics have blood on your hands." Because I pointed out, she said the earliest Christians didn't agree with Catholicism. But I was like, I thought you just said you didn't read the earliest Christians before. And she realized she contradicted herself. She freaked out. So some of our conversations with them were fun. So check out our Catholic Truth YouTube channel on
You
those.
have those on video?
Yeah. Well, no, not on video. Just I'm recounting
Oh
the
yeah,
conversations
yeah.
I
Sure,
had with
sure,
them.
sure. Okay, that's
Um,
still awesome though. Yeah.
yeah, no, it is pretty awesome. But one thing I do is when they come to the door, they always say, what do you think some of the problems are in the world today? I said, oh, and I give them their talking points. I said, well, faithlessness, war, suffering. They said, oh, yeah, we agree 100%. What do you think is the cause of that? And I said, oh, well, people are walking away from God nowadays, and they don't have faith anymore. We agree 100%. Yeah, we're on board with that. Why do you think that's happening? And I say, well, it's because they've left the true church of Jesus Christ, which is the Catholic Church. Oh, wait, what? And all of a sudden they just stop like frozen and they say, I know what their lines are before they do. And they always say, oh, well, we used to be Catholic. And I say, so you're admitting to me you left the true church of Jesus Christ for a religion that was started in the 1800s by an 18-year-old boy? And that's kind of like how our conversations start. Now, with Jehovah's Witnesses, if you press them too hard, they're just going to run and they're not coming back. So if you want to actually dialogue with them, you have to push them slowly, take time, deal with them. But yeah, there's some fun stories on that. So I just ask people to check that out on Catholic Truth or any religions. We talk about a lot of religions there on our podcast, #Catholic Truth. And yeah, you can check out our website, catholictruth.org.
Thank you for this super chat, Catherine. Bryan and I used to mash it up over Mormonism when I was a Mormon. Whoa, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, actually, yeah, Catherine. I actually used to love actually talking with Catherine, and we used to have really good discussions. Actually, it was her and another guy named Matthew. Matthew used to have like really good questions. He seemed honest. He seemed sincere. So him and I used to have back and forth all the time, and I actually really enjoyed the conversations.
Is it okay to destroy the Watchtower magazines they leave in public places?
Not only is it, it's not wrong. I actually used to go to the public places and take the magazines away because otherwise you're just leaving them there for people to see,
I always
and
grab it
possibly to be
throw
led
it in the
astray by.
trash. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
toss it right there in the trash bin.
Well, I personally take it home. I have a whole
Oh,
collection
do
of
you?
them. Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's a better idea. I should be doing that since I'm an apologist. I haven't seen one in a long time.
Because I like to read what they say about Catholics. Like, speaking of Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, they both religions teach that just Christianity in general is wrong, but the Catholic Church is the most wrong. That's the mother of all bad churches, and I see it in all the Jehovah's Witness magazines. And what's really sad is they don't understand Catholic teaching. Like, I have a magazine about the Immaculate Conception, and they're like, "That's when Jesus was born." I'm like, "What? That's like the stereotypical misconception," and you're
Are you
printing
kidding me
that.
right now?
So I brought it to their local chapter, and I said, "Can you explain this to me? Here's what Catholics believe. I know because I have Catholic family members, but you're saying it's this." And they say, "Well, your Catholic family members might not know the truth."
Do you have it nearby?
What's that?
That magazine where they say that?
Well, I have a bunch of
later on,
magazines.
post
I'd
it
have
on
to look
social
through them
media.
all. Yeah, I'd have
Post
to
on
look through them
social
all.
media at some point. I want to see a screenshot of that.
That would be fun. Actually, my friend has she's an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and she has every watchtower ever made cataloged in this huge binder. But yeah, they say a lot of strange things about Catholics, like especially like Bishop Strassmeyer, who rejected papal infallibility, and that's a known forgery. But they don't care. They're not allowed to look into these historical facts.
Wow. That's insane. Well, everybody go and check out Catholic Truth. Clearly, Bryan has plenty more content for you to consider on this. So if you are engaging Jehovah's Witnesses, this is the man, or Mormonism. I want to get you back on to talk about Mormonism.
Yeah. And you know what? Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are totally different. I don't consider Jehovah's Witnesses will be nice to you as long as they tolerate you, but if you show any kind of resistance, they're not interested in talking to you. They only want you if you're going to convert. Whereas Mormons, you could tell them they're wrong up and down, and they keep coming back. They were really nice, really kind. I met with them for almost 2 years, every week for hours. And we had some of the best conversations. Like, it was actually really enjoyable. They were super nice. And even when they disagreed, or even when I, showed the inconsistencies in their religion, they weren't jerks about it. They said, you know what? We don't know the answer to that. We'll go look it up for you and come back next week. I said, I respect that. Thank you. That's cool. And so, I actually have a lot of respect for Mormons.
About a year ago, when I was in Costa Rica, we ran into some Mormons, and they tried to ambush me. And within about 2 minutes of talking to me, they all of a sudden realized they were way out of their depth. And it was funny. Instead of trying to evangelize me, they just immediately reverted into, okay, so I have a theological question for you. So tell me about this and explain this to me. And I had this question about churches. They started just asking me church history and theology questions, and they just reverted to learning mode at that point. It was pretty interesting.
Great.
They never asked me for my contact information.
If you don't mind me saying, I had one story. I was doing street evangelization in Boston, and we had 7 of us, and we saw 7 Mormons in the distance, and all of my friends' eyes got really big. They're like, Mormons, let's go get them. And they all started charging ahead. And I don't know. I just felt the Holy Spirit saying, don't do that. It's not an argument, go talk to them, go love them. And so I went up to them and I said, hey guys, how are you? Because 2 of them there were 5 Mormons and I think it was 6 Catholics. And then there were 2 standing aside and me. So I went up to the 2 and I said, hey guys, how you doing? Tell me about Jesus. Why do you love Jesus? And they actually gave a really good answer. And they said, now you tell me why you love Jesus. So I told them how Jesus changed my life. And we had this wonderful conversation, and they said, thank you. And I said, for what? They said, you're the first nice Catholic we've ever spoken to that hasn't judged us or jumped down our throat. And I said, oh, well, thank you. I told them, I was like, I love this conversation that we had. So thank you guys. Pray for me and I'll pray for you. And so we left it at that. And I think that has to be the basis of all the conversations.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome approach. I appreciate that. Well, look, Bryan, thank you so much. I want to get you back on the show at some point. Everybody go and check out Catholic Truth and subscribe to his channel. Support what Bryan is doing. And hey, while you're at it, hit the subscribe button here too at Reason and Theology if you haven't already. All right, that's going to do it. We'll see you later.